everybody. Welcome to another DxO webinar. I'm your host, Photo Joseph, and it's good to see you again. It's the first one in 2022, isn't it? It's always good to be back, and today I'm going to be showing you a little bit of Photolab 5. We are going to specifically be working with landscape images today. This is really going to be about focusing on workflow and the unique tools inside of Photolab that can help you to get the most out of your images. And so basically what we'll be doing today is tearing through, I think 4 or 5 photos here and just doing a variety of things on them to make them their best. And hopefully out of this, it'll inspire some of you to dig a little bit deeper into the app yourselves, maybe look back at some of your older images that you might have thought were not really worthy and see if you can pull some new life into them. So that's basically what we're going to be doing today. Let's pull up my little slide here with the actual agenda. So this isn't in order. This is kind of everything that I will be covering, and of course be doing this all inclusive throughout the different photos. So this is not in this photo I'm going to show this feature, because that's not really the nature of photo editing, is it? We do what we need to do to any individual photo. But we will be looking at low light on some of these photos, so high ISO, low light, and treating those with the Deep Prime algorithm, which of course does wonderful, wonderful things to your images. We'll talk about color control and details in the skies. We're going to look at a few different things in there with skies, enhancing certain parts of it, saturating certain parts, and so on. We'll be looking at fixing some atmospheric issues. It's kind of funny because when looking for images for this, where I want to look for any kind of fog or mist I want to get rid of, it's kind of hard to find, because if I shoot fog, it's very intentional. I want that mist in there, but I found a few good examples to show what happens if you want to knock that back a little bit. And then, of course, bringing out the hidden details, which just kind of goes throughout everything that we're doing here, and finding those details in your images to make them look their absolute best. So that's that. Also, as always, if you do decide to make any purchases based off of today's webinar, I would certainly personally appreciate it if you head over to my website, photojoseph.com/DxO. At that landing page, you will find not only the upcoming webinars, all past webinars are listed there, and of course, purchase links to all of the software. So be sure to check that out. All right, with that said, let's get this out of the way and jump into Photolab. Oh yes, last thing, if you have questions throughout, go ahead and drop them into the Q&A section of the webinar panel, and those questions will be aggregated and dropped into another window for me so that I can do my best to answer them. And I'll just kind of keep an eye on that and jump over there whenever there's questions. So that's it. All right, let's start off with this picture here. This photo is, this is old, actually. This is a really old photo here. If I go to my metadata on here, see it was a 5D Mark II. Really nice lens, 50mm f1.2 lens, but it's probably shot, let's see here, 3200 ISO, shot at f16, so stop way down. Honestly, that probably was a mistake, the fact that it was shot at such a small aperture and therefore a high ISO. But it's one of these photos that you look at and you go, well, it's kind of flat. It's definitely a little bit hazy out there. There are some colors. If we look closely out in the sky, there's some colors out there. But it's not that much, but let's see what we can do with it. This is one of those photos where I just want to see what we can do with this, see what we can make out of it. If we look at it really close, let's go ahead and zoom in 1:1. We'll see that there's a fair amount of noise in here. It's not crazy noisy, but it definitely has got some noise. And yeah, so these are some of the things we're going to work on. Now, as any of you know who have watched my presentations before, for me, one of the first things I'll ever do with an image is just take the exposure slider and rack that up and down just to see what's there. For me, this is the fastest way to find out what detail I'm looking for. So for example, if I'm looking at this photo, looking at the cloud, the kind of bright spot in the top left corner there, and I'm looking at it going, oh, I want to recover some cloud data in there. Well, until I know that there's cloud data in there, what's the point of trying to recover it? I could spend all this time trying to recover data only to discover that it's not there. So the easiest way to find out if anything's there or not is just take that exposure slider, go back and forth, and find out exactly what's hiding inside of your file. So to do that, I'll go up here to the exposure, which is under the light controls. We've got your exposure compensation, and I'll just take that slider and drag it up to see if there's anything in the shadows that I might want to pull out, and it doesn't really look like there is, and I'll pull it down to see what's in the sky. And this is great because doing this, now obviously I've way underexposed the image here, but by bringing this way down, I can see that there is some color up here. Not a lot, I don't have a lot to work with, but I've got some color in here, maybe a little bit of texture. There's something there to work with. It's not a lot, so I know that I'm not going to fight trying to find clouds that don't exist, but I also know that I can find some color in this. So this is just kind of my first point of process for any photo. I just want to see what I'm working with to look for what I might want to recover. So with that said, let's start playing with the image. I've got kind of a problem here in that the sky is bright, and if I bring the exposure down on the sky, that's probably going to end up looking better. The foreground's a bit dark, so I want to bring it up a little bit, but I'm going to have to really be careful because bringing it up just even a little bit tends to wash it out and go a bit flat. But I think I will start by bringing it up just a hair. I'm going to close these thumbnails here just to make the whole thing a little bigger. Let's bring it up just a little. It's like about a stop or so. So there's not a whole lot in there. But by doing that, I have kind of flattened it, even though I've brought some detail into that foreground. So to pull that down, there's a couple different approaches. I could go for my shadow sliders or the midtone sliders and maybe pull something in or out of there. So I might pull the midtones, maybe not quite, maybe pull my shadows. That's probably getting closer. But what I like to do, and this is very much a personal workflow, I really like working with curves. I find the curves to be very, very flexible, very powerful, even if maybe not the most intuitive when you first start with them. But once you get your head around them, I think that the curves are really great to work with. So I'm going to go down to my curves here, and I'm going to add a point pretty low on the shadow scale here and just pull it down a little bit. And you see how we're adding some darkness, adding some depth into the darker ranges of the shadow, not the blackest parts, but the darker parts, while still leaving the darker midtones, if that makes any sense, alone. And so just that little change there, back and forth, is just adding contrast into just the right spot of the image. So I like that. I think that has done a tremendous amount to the image already. And if we just do a compare up here to before and after, we can see that we've got some nice new detail into the foreground. But of course, my sky is actually looking worse because I've brightened that down a little bit. But we'll come back to that. Before I go into the sky, take a close look at the foreground here. And we've been looking at this photo for a while, and so you might be used to it now. Your eyes have become adjusted to it, and so you don't really see a problem with it. You're like, yeah, okay, what's wrong with it? But if we look up at the histogram, look up here, we'll see that the red channel is really far off. And yes, this is a green foreground, but this is feeling a little bit too cool to me. It's just like the colors don't really work. So what I'm going to do is go over to the curves again, because I love working with the curves. I'm going to go to my red channel, because I'm looking at that red part of the histogram here in the shadows, and I'm going to pull the shadows up just a tiny bit. Now, what I want you to do while I do this, I'm going to wiggle it back and forth, or up and down, I should say. While I'm doing that, look at the histogram and watch how the darkest part of the image, the red channel, is moving up. And if I bring that up to roughly line up with everything else, we can see that the image, the green shrubbery, has become much more neutral. Now, maybe that's a little bit too neutral, so I'll split the difference and pull it back a little bit. But by doing that, the image takes on a more natural look to it. So I think it's really important to pay attention to your histogram. Remember that the actual image you're seeing on screen, the photo you're looking at, is a lie, right? No matter how good your screen is, how calibrated it is or isn't, how bright it is or isn't, you're not seeing the truth there, because every monitor can be a little bit different. Whites may not be pure white and so on, but the histogram's the truth. If you look at the histogram, if you're looking at something that should be neutral, then those waves on the histogram should all line up. That'll tell you that it's an equal amount of red, green, and blue. And so that's a good way to look at an image and judge whether it needs to be adjusted or not. So I like doing it that way. All right, I'm going to turn off my webcam to make a little bit more space on here too for this demo. All right, so I've kind of neutralized that out a little bit. I think I like that better. Now let's try bring a little bit more color in with saturation. Let's see here. I'll go into my color tabs in here, and let's take my saturation and see if I can pump that up a little bit. Yeah, there's definitely some more color that can be pulled out of this. We definitely still have some blue, cool areas in the background in there, but that's okay. It is a cool kind of leaning towards probably post sunset here. So I think the little bit of coolness is okay. But maybe I just want to warm up the whole thing a little bit more. So let's try that with the color temperature slider. Let's take a little bit of warmth. Oh yeah, that looks nice. Just a touch in there. Maybe that's a bit too much. Look at how much more green the foreground is now. So now let's do another compare back and forth, and we're definitely making some serious progress in here. All right, now let's start working on the sky. There's this little bit of red in here that I want to see if I can pull more out of. So I'm going to do that by using the HSL tool. It's hue, saturation, luminance. And if you haven't seen the HSL tool before, I have entire webinars based just on this tool. But effectively, just to quickly recap, each one of these circles, each one of these dots represents a color range. You can customize the color range entirely by simply clicking and dragging the range around. So the inside circle here is the range, the outside is the feathering as it feathers off to the other colors in the range. And you can set a custom one by grabbing an eyedropper and clicking anywhere on the scene to set a color range based off of where you click there. These presets are simply presets. Each one of these can be overwritten if you want. It's just a starting point. I'm going to go ahead and click on red because it is the reds that I want to enhance in here. And then I'm going to adjust down here with these sliders, the saturation, luminance, or uniformity. And I'm just going to take the saturation and pump that up. And we can see in the lower left-hand side of the image here where the reds are starting to pump up a little bit. Maybe I'll pull the luminance down to darken them, because that's a trick for getting your colors to look a bit more saturated, to kind of darken them and saturate them. And we're getting there. It's not a lot. If I toggle this on and off, it's not a huge difference. Actually, it is a pretty big difference. We're getting a pretty good amount of change in there. I might also want to increase the range of what is being affected. If I look at this at 100%, let's zoom into this a bit here. And we can start to see a little bit of breaking up where the transition from the saturated to the less saturated areas is happening. So I'm going to take my expansion here and simply drag this out to make this a little bit broader, so I'm getting a little bit more of the blues in here, and maybe take out the feathering of that a bit as well. And then we're starting to get a little bit more colors into that. There's a little bit of chromatic aberration that's being highlighted in here. It's not much, but there is a tiny bit of it. So I'm going to go into my optical correction area here and turn on, so chromatic aberration is already on. I'm going to enable purple fringing, which is going to try and remove a little bit more of that, and it does. It's not much, but it takes off a little bit more, and I can play with my sliders in here. There we go, just to knock that down a little bit more as well. Now this is definitely starting to get a little bit chunky because I am pushing this so much, and remember, it is a high ISO image. So before I go any farther, I want to find out if applying deep prime at the end is going to help. So remember, deep prime gets applied on render at output. So, but we can see a preview of it by simply grabbing our little magnifier tool, dropping it anywhere on the scene here, and then previewing what's going to happen in this window. And here you can see that it is a pretty significant change. This is going to look a lot better. If I click and hold, there we see the original. Let go, we see the deep prime version of it. So yes, I am going to get a nice result out of deep prime. So at this point, I'm going to go, you know what, I'm going to continue working on this photo. Let's see what else I can do in here. All right, let's zoom out and let's take a look at the sky as a whole. I want to do something to the clouds in here. Remember earlier, if I go back over to my exposure compensation and I just drag this way down, there is a lot in the sky there. And now that I've played with the colors in here, there's really quite a lot to work with in there. So I'm going to hit undo, bring that exposure back where it was. And now I know that I want to work with the sky, but I don't want to drop the exposure on the foreground. All right, well, how am I going to go about doing this? Well, let's try using the local adjustments tool. And I think first I'll start with just a straight up graduated filter. The graduated filter, the way this works, if I click and drag down, what we're seeing right now is the mask. Everything on this side of this little dot right there, so this side of it, is going to have whatever I do with these sliders applied at 100%. This side of this little handle on here will be 0%. And then the transition from 100% to 0% is determined by this slider here. So if I was to, just to really kind of drive this home, let me make this really narrow, take the exposure way down, we can see in here that we have the exposure dropped way down up on the top, not at all at the bottom, and then this transition shows the transition from 100% to 0%. Okay, so with that in mind, let's see if I can do this, do something good on here to get that sky down over the mountain range here. And yeah, no, it's not going to work. Why isn't it going to work? Well, because look, we're affecting all this area here. We just added all this shadowing into here, so that is just not going to cut it. I need to apply this look into the sky, but not apply it down here on the mountain range. There's a bunch of different ways that we can go about this. I'm going to use the new control line tool for this. So with this selected, I want to delete it. I'll just hit the delete button, and away she goes. Let's right click and choose control line. And a control line is a linear gradient, but it also has the control point or the U point technology built into it. So I take this eyedropper, and wherever I drop this eyedropper is going to build a mask based off of that color selection, combining it with the control line. So let's turn the masks on so we can see what mask we're building. And well, that's actually pretty good right there. We can see that we've got the clouds up here. This is not really being affected, so we may have to come back and work on that later. But I've got the clouds affected and barely affecting the mountain range in here. I might want to move this around a little bit and try and find a better area to sample from that's going to get more sky, less mountain range. But I think that's actually going to work pretty good like that. So let's do that. I'll drop it there. Let's turn off the mask and take the exposure down. Now we're getting somewhere. Now we're getting somewhere. I'm still getting a little bit more than I would like on the mountain up here. And again, we don't really have enough going on in the sky up here. So now we're going to start combining masks. I'm going to go ahead and right click on control point and add a control point on top of the control lines. This is combining these two masks together. If we look at the show masks, we can see exactly what's happening in here. I could even go to that control point. Let's go over to my local adjustments and take the mask selectivity down on there to really ensure that, we don't want to go too far here, to really ensure that I'm affecting all of this sky up here. Maybe I'll make this a little bit smaller and not building a whole new mask that I don't want. So let's pull this down a little bit more. Looking pretty good. But I have now, look, I've added more into this selection down here, which I don't want. So let's go ahead and add a control point down here, drop that on, and now I've got a negative control point that I'm starting to combine. So we're really using a combination of all these different technologies here. We've got our control line and our control point, positive control points and negative control points combining together to select all of this sky up here. So now if I hide the masks, now we've got something pretty good in here. Now as I adjust this slider here, we're really hitting just the sky. It looks like I could do a little bit more cleanup over here, maybe add another negative control point, a smaller one down into that tip there. Maybe add another one up here. Yeah, we're definitely getting there. Hey, you might want to spend a little bit more time on it, but you can see this is really starting to come together. So now I've got this final image that I really like. If I compare it, huge difference before and after. But remember, we haven't applied Deep Prime yet, so let's go ahead and do that. I'll close this. Go over to, let's see here, oh, sorry, we have already got Deep Prime applied, so I already turned that on in here. So now I'm gonna go ahead and export this. Let's see, I guess I need to pull this little guy back up here, get to my export window, here it is. And let's export this guy out. I will click on the export button and I'm gonna export a standard JPEG. I'm gonna let it go into the same folder. So it's gonna show up right next to the original. Export that out and give that a moment to render. We'll see a progress bar down here, and then we'll be able to compare the two side by side. So with and without the noise reduction applied to it, and we'll see what kind of a difference that makes. So there we have it. There's the one with the noise reduction. There it goes. So if I go back to this one, if you want to do a before and after compare, here's a neat little trick. If I click on this compare dropdown, this is where I would normally compare between the original and the edited one. But I can switch what it compares to. I can say, show me compared to the output instead. And now when I hit that button, it's going to compare to the output. Let's go ahead and zoom into 100% on here and compare that. And now you can see the difference there in the noise reduction and how all that beautiful noise reduction has been applied in there. So before and after on there. Hopefully that's coming through on the GoToWebinar screen clearly, but that is a big, big difference in there. So there we go. You know, maybe it's not a perfect image, but I really like the way that's come out. It is definitely a massive improvement over where we started, and away we go. All right, I see there is a question that has come up, so let me pop my webcam back on and take a look at that. All right, Alexander asks, is there a rule or system how to balance the trade-off between stepping down the aperture and increasing the ISO? Great question. So this is a general photography question, of course, not related to the software itself, but the balance between your ISO and your aperture is largely going to be dependent on what you're photographing and what your desire is. So with the aperture, of course, the larger the aperture, which is the smaller the number, the larger the aperture, the more light is coming in, and therefore the lower ISO you can have, which the lower ISO you can have is generally desirable. You usually want the lowest ISO possible. But opening up the aperture all the way means that you are getting a shallow depth of field, which if you're shooting a portrait is probably exactly what you want. If you're shooting a landscape, it may not be what you want. You know, if I shot this photo at f1.2, the mountains in the foreground or the hills in the foreground might have actually been out of focus, which I probably wouldn't want. So I need to stop down. I said in the beginning, I think for this photo, it was stopped down too far, but in general, I would probably want to stop it down a bit to get more depth of field. Use your depth of field preview on your camera and check out what is going to be in focus and what isn't. And of course, digital cameras, you can chimp it. So you can take a picture, look at it closely, zoom into that picture and see exactly what is and isn't in focus. But in general, you're going to want to have as low of an ISO as possible. And then your aperture will be dependent creatively on what you want, whether you want shallow or broad depth of field. Then of course the third part of that exposure triangle is going to be your shutter speed, which may or may not need to be at a high speed, right? If I'm shooting something that's moving and I want to freeze it, or even just people who move, obviously, you might need a higher shutter speed. Whereas a landscape like this, especially if I had a tripod, I could have shot a really long shutter speed and shot it at a very low ISO, even stopped down. So just a little basic photo 101 on there, but Alexander, I hope that helped answers your question. David asks, with the landscape photo, could you have tilted the control line to remove the mountain from the sky enhancements? So sort of, right? If we go, let's go ahead and back into the adjustments in there. Go back and, oh, I'm looking at the JPEG. Let's go back to this one. Here we go. Okay, so if I go back into here and what you're suggesting is rotating this. So I can rotate it. So rotate it like so. So just by grabbing this line here, I can rotate it any angle I want. But in this particular photo, you know, if this was a clean line, then sure, that would totally work, but it's not. Right, the horizon line is not a clean line, so no matter what I do, I'm going to have to do a little bit of work to eliminate parts of the mountain range that I don't want to get selected. So I chose to just do it straight down like that. But that certainly is possible. As you saw, you can rotate that and then you can position it exactly where you want. So if you've got a line that's a nice clean angle on there, then by all means, just rotate it and away you go. Okay, let's move on to another photo in here. I'll go ahead and turn off my camera again. And let's go to this one next. I'm looking at, I don't know why I have JPEGs of all these photos down here. I'm not quite sure how that happened. That's very strange. Oh, well, that's okay. And what happened to this photo? What happened? Somehow in the process of resetting everything, things went really strange. All right, well, just ignore that. And I think maybe I had these selected and I accidentally hit a preset. I feel like that's what happened. Strange. Anyway, all right, so we're looking at this photo here now. This is very, very early in the morning. It's what's kind of wild about this photo. Let me make this a little bigger here. What's wild about this photo to me is it almost looks like a painting. It was such a calm morning. This is pre-sunrise, and there's no wind. If you look at the horizon out here, there's definitely haze in the sky, but it's just like it was painted on, these just very solid swaths of color. You see a little bit of detail in the mountain poking through. Even the sky itself has these very, very just flat bands in there. Now, at this point, the picture doesn't look that great. It's very kind of flat and undersaturated, but I want to play into this flatness of it and make it look kind of painterly. So let's see what I can do with it. All right, let's see, I've already reset the image. So let's go ahead and once again, start with the exposure. What have I got to work with? I pull it down, lift it up, and there's really not a whole lot of detail in here. There's not much to recover. Okay, so I'm probably gonna leave the exposure alone. Let's try that clear view tool. Remember, clear view is what's going to allow us to punch through this haze, and let's see what we get out of it. So here it is, clear view plus. Turn that on, and right away, a bunch of detail comes out. Now, at this point, I'll bring it up all the way. Because of the nature of this photo, it takes on a really weird look if I crank this up. We're getting some haloing around here, which is definitely not good. But this kind of painterly, watercolorly look to it is almost being enhanced, and I kind of dig it. Not this high, that's way too high. But I think if I bring this up a little bit, it's gonna really enhance that. Look at how sharp the edge of the mountain has gotten on here. And I don't know, I just kind of like it. It's kind of weird, but I kind of dig it. Now, there is a lot of noise. If I go into one-to-one on here, we are definitely seeing a fair amount of noise in here. So let's see what Deep Prime is going to do for me. Go to the right lens, right tool here. There it is. Let's take a look at Deep Prime. Drop it on the tip of the mountain there. And yeah, sure. Look at how smooth that is. Now we're going to get that whole watercolor painterly thing back. So yeah, I dig it. I'm going to continue on, knowing that this is something I'm going to do at the very end. So let's go back out. Maybe I want to saturate those reds, so I'm going to use that HSL tool again. This time, instead of just using the default red, I'll go ahead and grab the eyedropper, click on the red in there, and you can see it shifted down here just a little bit. So it's sampled something a bit more accurate for this photo. Let's take the saturation up. Yeah, there we go, getting some pink in there. I think I'll expand the feathering range out a little bit. And if I wanted to rotate the hue of that, I can do that as well. Grab this little handle, sure, let's call it a handle, and I can rotate the hue of that sky that I've selected, and maybe just a little bit, I get a little bit more orange in there, so I get a mix of the red and orange. Definitely like that. Maybe pull the luminance down a touch. There we go. We're getting somewhere. I know it's a bit weird, but I like it. I like it a lot, and that's actually all I'm going to do to this. Let's go ahead and export this one, so we can compare it to the JPEG. I'm going to delete this. I have no idea where these other things came from. Let me just delete that other JPEG so it doesn't confuse the issue. And all right, so there's that image that I just worked on. Let's go ahead and click on export. Again, leaving it as a standard JPEG. Export that. It's going to drop it into the same folder, and away we go. So we'll let that render out. I can see a couple more questions coming in, so I'll come to those in just a moment. And that's done. All right, let's go ahead and set the compare as I did before to the new output. And I'll go ahead and zoom in 1-to-1 on here, and let's do a compare. So there's the treated image without deep prime, and there's the treated image with deep prime. And this again is really, in my mind, taking on this really cool painterly look that I love it. I think it's really, really cool. So, you know, beauty's in the eye of the beholder, right? I think it's pretty slick, so I like it. All right, that's the second image I wanted to work with. Before we move on to the next one, I will answer some more questions. All right. Mike said, I missed how you made the negative control points on the mountains. Can you review those steps? Absolutely. So let me go back to the mountain photo, to the landscape photo here, and jump back into local adjustments. And here we go. All right. So when you're making, actually, no, this would be easier to just show a brand new one. Let me just do that. It'd be easier to show. Let's say I wanted to do local adjustments on here, and I'll right click and I'm going to choose control line. So I drag a control line out. This is positive control line. Let's make it really dark, just there. That's just what I've done. Now I want to add a negative control point. Down here, you have this toggle between positive and negative control lines. Now, if you're on Windows, for some reason that I cannot explain, this isn't there. You have to do it by holding down the Option key. If you hold down the Option key, notice how my cursor changes to a minus. So if you want to add a negative control line or control point, that's how you would do that. So I'll right click and change this over to control point, and then hold it down to do a minus control point, and I'll drop it up in the sky in there. And now I've got this negative control point that is now protecting the sky, or drag it down here and it's building a mask on a separate area. So that's how you do that. You either switch it positive, negative here, or if you're on Windows, you hold down the Option key to do that. I hope that helps, Mike. Evan says, I missed where I selected the control line. So right clicking, let's just reset this whole thing, set it back to positive. Right clicking when you're in the local adjustments. So you have to be in the local adjustments first. So let's start over. If I close this out, up here in the top, you see a button that says local adjustments. I click on that. And then to change which tool, I right click and this little panel pops up with a bunch of different tools. And we've covered this panel in depth on other webinars. Just if you want to learn more about them, by all means, go watch those. But here you can choose between your control point or your control line. Control line is the newest tool in Photolab 5. You have a graduated filter, an eraser if you're painting them by hand, a tool to make a brand new mask, a reset to reset a mask, a brush for a traditional brush, and then an auto mask, which is a brush with edge detection built into it. So these are all the tools that you have. So you right click and you choose the one that you want. In this case, it was control line, click and drag, and now you've got a linear gradient combined with the control point technology of being able to set that mask based off of whatever part of the image you want. Steve asks, is there a way to mask out smart lighting and related effects? So if, for example, you want it on the background, but it's making a face look wrong. Can you mask it out to not affect the face? So not smart lighting. If we look at, let's see here, delete that, do a control point, just do this. You don't have smart lighting, you have clear view in here. So you could counter the clear view by going negative. Actually, no, I lied. You can't do that. You can't counter by going negative. So you would need to only add clear view selectively instead of adding it to everywhere. But the smart lighting does not. I double check that. Hold on. Exposure, contrast, micro contrast, clear view, highlights, midtones, shadows, blacks. Yeah. Smart lighting is not part of this inclusion. So no, you can't do smart lighting selectively. You can't remove it selectively. So in that case, what you would do is, I would say adjust your smart lighting to the place where the face still looks okay, and then selectively do exposure, highlight and shadow adjustments elsewhere on the image with the control points or control lines. Perhaps you could counter smart lighting with the highlight and shadow adjustments. That could be worth trying as well, but there is no direct counter smart lighting tool, although I like the idea. Okay, that was it. All right, let's move on. And moving on to the next photo is going to be Check my notes. Ah, yes. Where are we? I really like this next photo. If I can find it. Where'd it go? Where? Oh, here it is. Man, this. Yeah, I'm gonna. I think I must have hit a preset accidentally. That's so funny how these things happen. All right, let's get rid of that JPEG. I applied a preset and rendered out JPEGs of all these images. That is so bizarre. All right, here's the photo. There's the original photo. This is a nice photo. As it is, it's off to a pretty good start. I think it's already looking very good, but we're gonna see if we can make it even better. So with this one, let's make this a little bit bigger in here. I'm going to start with the clear view again. So we've got this morning fog, let's call, yeah, it's probably a little bit of morning fog. So we definitely see the village in the background. There's getting a little bit on the hazy side. So let's go ahead over to clear view. And by the way, if you can't find it, clear view is right there. But if you can't find it, you can go up here to the search and just search for whatever you want. So if I type in clear, then there's my clear view. It shows up in there, and now I can access that. Let's get rid of the compare mode. So that clear view slider in place. Now if well, actually, let me just reset that. Just turn it on and leave it on its default setting. So you can see there's a pretty big improvement, and that's actually looking quite good. If I take it up higher, we will cut through more and more of that haze, but I don't want to get rid of it completely. You know, I kind of like that morning misty haze. So I might actually even want to drag it down a little bit. I want to punch through a little bit, but not too much. Yeah, I like that. Notice as well, it's done a nice job of de-vignetting the edges, although to be fair, I'm actually going to compensate for that later and redo it because I kind of like the vignetting. But yeah, it's done a good job there. Okay, so there's our first step. We've done a little bit of clear view, we get rid of that. Let's fix the horizon. This fact that it's a little bit crooked is kind of bugging me. So a few different ways you can correct the horizon. There's a horizon tool in here that you can, if you have a very clear horizon line, you can now adjust this to the right horizon. I don't really have a clear horizon line in here, so I'm just going to reset this, close that, and it looks like I actually applied it. Good job. And I'm going to just do it manually. So where's the horizon? I'm going to type in horizon. There it is. And I'm just going to adjust this manually here. So I can drag the slider back and forth, or I can go in with the arrow tool here and just kind of step up one little bit at a time. And I just want to get those foreground buildings looking vertical. I'm looking at the lines here and here, and I need to find a balance. Nothing's going to be perfect because it's not straight on, but let's say, I think right about there. It's pretty good. If I do a compare without geometry, there we go. So there's the correction. Yeah, that's definitely better. Okay, so I like that. We're going to leave that horizon line corrected there as it is. Next, let's take a look at the colors. This has this beautiful morning light. You can see the sun, the morning sun, just starting to kiss through here. We're getting a little bit of yellow morning glow on the trees here, a little bit around the trees here. What is this? The cotton, I think it's a pear blossom, apple blossoms most likely. Just getting a little bit of that there. And there's a little bit of yellow down here on the grass. See it down there in the valley? I want more of that. I want to bring that up a bit more. So I'm going to go into my color adjustments. Once again, use the HSL tool. You can tell I really like the HSL tool. Keep coming back to it. And we'll just go for the general yellow in here, and let's bring the saturation up. And boom, look at that, bringing that way up. It really enhances the yellow in here. Now you'll notice, if you look closely, excuse me, that we are saturating here. Let me slide this back and forth. But very clearly just the effect stops here, right? We're not affecting this here. And it doesn't look natural. So I need to allow some of this to get affected. So the reason it's not getting affected is it is green, more green, and this is more yellow, right? Let me take this off. Even just looking at it now, you can tell this part here is a little bit more yellow. This is a little bit more green. If I take my saturation up, I'm going to overdo it. I'm going to take it up all the way. This is now oversaturated. I know, we'll fix it. But you can see here that this has been oversaturated and this has not. And you can even start to see where it's breaking apart in here. If you look at the color wheel that we've been affecting, you can see how narrow of a range I'm currently affecting in here. So what I want to do is expand it out to get a little bit more of this green, not all of it, a little bit more. And then I'm going to want to use the feathering to really soften that transition out. So let's take this and drag it out just a little bit. And you can see as I drag it out how quickly it encompasses that. And then I'll feather that out a little bit more, maybe even contract it just a little. So now it's affecting it much more smoothly. And now I'm going to go ahead and take my saturation and put it at an actual reasonable level. So let's say right about there. Let's zoom out of this. and bring that up. Yeah, there we go. So now we got this nice, excuse me, nice enhancement of the yellow. Look at the yellowish green on the hill here. It's really, really nicely popping. Definitely coming together in there very nicely. Okay, next thing I want to do is see if I can enhance the white highlights, the little highlighted areas on these white flowers in there. They've got this little kiss of sunlight, but I want it to have more. So let's think about how we would go about doing this. If I zoom in close to this photo, what is it that I really want to do? What I really want to do is take the brightest parts of the image. Let's go zoom in even farther. Just the brightest parts of these image here and make it brighter. That's what I really want to do. So what's a good way to do that? Well, a good way to do that is going to be using the control points or control lines and isolating it to just those brightest parts of the image. Now, I only want to affect that on this part of the image here, so a control point might do it, but I think a control line is going to work better. So let's go into local adjustments, right click and choose control line. I'm going to do a pretty narrow one because I really want everything here to get affected. And this eyedropper, I'm going to need to position right on the white part of the flower in there. So let's turn on the masks and drag this around. I did this totally backwards, genius. Let's try that again. Want to make this go this way so that it affects everything. Come here, you, on the left-hand side. There we go. I think there we go. Got that cursor up. I've increased the cursor size on my Mac, and so finding the right place to click was proving challenging. And now I'll move this eyedropper around until it masks just the white tips of the flowers like that. And maybe I get a little bit better mask. Right, ooh, there we go. Nailed it. Look at that. Got it on there. Now, it is still getting some of the background, and I don't want that. I really want it to just be those highlights of the flowers. So I'll go over to my local adjustments tools. And this again is new in Photolab 5, the ability to select, to change the mask selection based off of the chrominance, that's the color, and the luminance values of the area that I've selected. So I started with this spot of the eyedropper. Now what I need to do is take my, I'll try taking the chrominance down, up, sorry, I want to restrict it, and maybe a little bit of the luminance as well. And look at that. Very quickly, we can build a mask that is just selecting those brightest parts of the flowers in there, of the cherry blossoms, apple blossoms. Let's back that off a little bit. I want to find that right balance in there. Looking pretty good. Okay, so now I've got the mask. Let's hide the masks, and I'll just try taking the highlights up. So here's my highlights. Let's take those up and check that out. Look at that difference. It just added that little kiss of brightness to those highlights. If I toggle this on and off, let's go ahead and get out of the local adjustments tool here. Close that. Toggle this on and off. Look at that difference. It's just this lovely little kiss of light on there. Probably should get rid of the roof on there. I'll leave it for now, but that is adding a nice little punch on there. So I love the way that's come out. That's what I wanted to do. I'll leave it like that. Oh, there's one more thing I want to fix. Look at this power line or something up there. Awful. So let's fix that. Let's crop it out. Now here's an interesting thing. Because I straightened the image therefore had to be cropped so that I didn't have these funny borders off the edges, right? Because I rotated the image. I changed the horizon line. But now if I'm looking at this going, oh, well, look, there's more flowers over here that I kind of want to keep. Interesting. So how about this? Instead of being constrained to the original aspect ratio of the photo, I don't care what the aspect ratio is. So I'm going to change that. I'll go down here to the crop, go under here where it says original. That's how it was originally shot. And I'll just say unconstrained. And now I can set this crop however I want. So let's go a little bit wider. Well, can't go that wide. Got to watch the bottom down here. I don't want to get that black in there. Maybe let's get more on this side. So we're just finding that balance. I don't want the power line in there, but I do want as much of the image otherwise. And yeah, I say that right about there. So now I've got more of the photo in there. I've cut out this hillside, the top of the hillside there, which is actually just fine because that was kind of a distracting part of the image anyway. Close that, and there we go. I like it. Now, maybe I want to add a little bit of vignetting. I talked about the vignetting getting cropped out earlier. I want to add a little bit of that back in. Because I have the Film Pack installed as well on here, I have all the creative effects from Film Pack, including the creative vignetting in here. So let's add just a little bit of creative vignetting on top of that. And there we go, just a touch, just a little bit in there. Dig it. All right, and there we go. There's my image. I like it. All right, let's go ahead and check back in with the questions. There's a couple more that are popping up here. Mike has said, I love how you use the compare tool. Do you use this while you're processing an image to check the results as you go along with additional editing? Absolutely. I think that using the compare to look at the before and after, the original versus what you've done to it, constantly while you're editing is really important, because it's very easy to go really far down a rabbit hole, and one of two things can happen. Either you spend so much time focusing on this one little area and you go, okay, I finally got it. Hours in, you finally got it. And then you zoom back and you realize, I couldn't even see that. Like if I compare to the original, I just didn't even notice. It was such a small change. I spent all this time on something that just doesn't matter. So keep doing that toggle back and forth so that you see how much of a change that actually makes as you go. More likely, though, is the opposite of that, where you make a change that has just gone way too far, but you don't realize it. So as an example, let's say I'm playing with the vignetting here. So I did a little vignetting. And then I come back, oh, you know, a little bit stronger. So I add a little bit more vignetting in there. Yeah, that's good. I keep doing something else. Come back, add a little bit more vignetting. Yeah, that's good. Come back and add a little bit more vignetting. And at some point you're going, yeah, I think this looks good. Oh, I should do a compare before and after. I click on that and you go, whoa, well, actually, let me turn off the geometry corrections. There we go. And you go, whoa, I added, look at it. That vignetting is totally visible there. As I toggle that, it is very obvious at post-processing vignetting. And you don't want that. You don't want it to look like it's obviously been vignetted. So by doing that back and forth, by constantly toggling it on and off, you get that view of whether you have gone too far or not. So yeah, constantly go back and do that. Very, very important. And the way that the compare tool works in here, you just saw it. When you drop this down, you can choose to compare to either the image with no corrections or, no corrections without geometry or no corrections with geometry. When you do it without, then things like your crop and your rotate change as well. So it can be kind of hard to compare the true before and after when you know you're cropping it, you know you're rotating it. So leave that on, leave the geometry in place. And now when I do the compare, it's just the color, the sharpening, the vignetting, and the other effects that I've added. So very important to be able to toggle that on and off. And then once you've output an image, as you saw earlier, then that output shows up in here as an option so you can compare to that as well, which is super useful when you're working with Deep Prime. Speaking of Deep Prime, Jim says, why didn't you start with Deep Prime to start? Okay, why didn't you start with Deep Prime to start on the raw image? So remember that within Photolab, Deep Prime doesn't get rendered until you export it. So we're working with the raw image the whole way through. It's always the raw image that we're working with. Deep Prime only gets rendered on export. And that's only because Deep Prime is so processor intensive that if it was being applied in real time, everything on the system would come to a screeching halt. At some point in the future, when there's like an M3 Mac or something, you know, then maybe Deep Prime will be able to be applied in real time. But as it is today, it's not. It's too slow. And so it needs to be rendered on output. Now you might be thinking about a pure raw workflow where you process the image through pure raw and you get a linear DNG out of it that already has the noise reduction applied to it. You could do that, absolutely. You could even go into here, apply pure raw and export a DNG. So you could even do that and bring it back in. But for the most part, the workflow, the simplest workflow is to simply edit like I did here. If you think you're going to use pure raw or you want to just see how good it's going to be, go ahead and test it as we did with the other photos. Look at the little preview window and see how it looks, and just know, okay, I know this is going to get applied on render on output, and there you go. So that's how I'd go about doing it. Next question. Peter says, would erasing the power line work? Possibly. Let's see here. If I uncrop it, yeah, I mean, you could. It'd be a little bit tough up here among the trees. It'd probably be fairly straightforward to do along here. You'd be cloning it out. You could, you know, it'd take a little bit of work, but I wanted to crop it. So there. But yeah, you could certainly give it a try. Okay, let's see. How are we on time? Do we have time for one more image? We do. I've got one more image queued up. And yeah, this is a totally different type of image. Oh, actually, I have two more queued up. Okay, we're going to do the Hawaii sunset, sunrise. I don't even know. Let's find out. Let's pull this up. Where's Hawaii? Hawaii, here it is. Again, applied some bizarre preset in here, so let's just get rid of this and select this raw image. Actually, it's kind of cool looking, honestly, but let's reset that. All right, there's the original image. And let's work on this. So technically, nothing wrong with this image. It's got a, did I reset? I did. Nice exposure, nice cloud detail, nice color in the skies. That's fine, but let's see if we can do something else to it. All right, I've got some ideas of what I want to do. First of all, let's just play with the saturation. It looks good, but maybe we can make it a little bit more saturated without making it fake. So I'll go to my color controls, take my saturation, and bring that up. Sure enough, yeah, we can definitely push that quite a bit. All right, looking good. So a little before and after. Before and after, yep, saturation definitely acceptable, haven't gone too far. Even right there, for the person who had asked earlier about the, Mike who had asked about using the compare tool, saturation is a great one, right? If saturation, let me take that and vibrancy. Okay, so I took saturation and vibrancy all the way up. This is obviously too much, but maybe you did it over time, and so you don't really recognize that this is too much. By doing a compare, you go, oh, yeah, I kind of pushed that a little bit too far, so I should back that off a little bit. So yeah, that's really, really useful to use that compare tool in there. Okay, so I got my saturation in place. Let's take a look at the sky. The blue sky on here, I want it to be darker, more dramatic. Not the clouds. Actually, I do want to do something with the clouds, but we'll come back to that later. I want to make the sky more dramatic. So I'm going to do that with a linear control line tool. Let's have a nice, actually, you know what? Here, before we do that, let's do it with a straight up graduated filter. Pull this down, darken the whole thing, and we see what would happen if we did that. So the whole thing, the clouds get too dark, and it's not going to work. So I just want to darken the blue sky. Okay, so delete that. Control line. We'll do pretty subtle gradients over a good part of the image here. Take that eyedropper and drop it up into the blue sky. Preview the mask so we know exactly what's being affected. So here we can see here that we are getting just the blue sky, a little bit of the clouds in there. So if I wanted to, I could restrict what's going to be affected in there with this tool. That's probably pretty good there. And let's go ahead and hide the masks and take that sky and darken that a little bit. Maybe even add a little bit more saturation into it. Let's take the saturation up. So I got this really rich, dark blue sky. I kind of like that. I like really dark, moody skies in there. I can go too far. Yeah, there's an example, you know, before and after. Did I go too far? Probably. I kind of like it, but it's probably too far. So let's back it off a little bit. There we go. Okay, so now we're just affecting the sky. If I go into the mask selectivity and I adjust it while I'm not looking at the mask, then we'll see what parts of the clouds are being affected. And so again, you should definitely do both. I think it's very valid to adjust the mask selectivity, both looking at the mask and looking at the overall image. At the end of the day, all that matters is that it looks good. So if you're happy with what you get, then that's all that matters. Okay, dig that. How about these orange puffs of cloud on here? I want to really pump those guys up. So let's create a new mask. New mask. Let's do a control point mask. We'll drop this onto the cloud on there. Let's take a look at the mask, and we can see, oh, well, that's pretty clearly just got that cloud in there. Maybe I want to restrict this even more. Maybe do I, don't I? I'm not sure yet. We'll do that. I'm going to drop another control point within the same set of sliders. So with the same set of sliders going, I'm going to add another control point to this cloud here. So now both of these clouds are being affected together. You can see they're both being affected together as I adjust the sliders in here. Now let's get out of the mask mode and let's take the saturation and pump that up a little bit more orange. Maybe go into my brightness and pull that down to make it a little bit richer. And I can see in here, I made my my restriction a little bit too strong in there. So let's back that off a little bit in there, get a little bit more of that puffy, wispy white cloud, and that's looking great. All right, another before and after, another compare. We're definitely getting somewhere. Don't forget that when you're doing this, you can name your control points and control lines. So let's see here. This one here is the clouds. So just double click on it. Let's call that orange clouds. And this control line is the blue sky. So now I know exactly which ones I'm looking at. If I want to toggle an individual one on and off, I can do that in there as well. Pretty slick. And yeah, I think that works out pretty well. All right. What do we got? Just a few more minutes. I do want to do one more image here because it's something very, very different. And that is this one here, which once again needs to be completely reset. Man, that's bizarre. Okay. This photo, believe it or not, is not black and white. It was just a very, very monochromatic kind of day. So first thing I want to do is fix the horizon line on this one. For this, I can use this perfect horizon tool where I can just position this very easily right on the horizon line. There she is, perfectly placed. Apply that, close, and away we go. So now I've got that. Okay, look at how misty, foggy, dreary this is. It's cool, but I kind of want some more texture in these trees in here. So let's head over to this tool here. I'm going to take my my Clearview Plus, turn that on, and boom, there's a huge amount of detail brought in there. I can bring it up, get some more in there, but we don't want to get carried away. I think just the default setting looks good. But look at the water. Too much on the water. Definitely don't want that on the water. So I'm not going to do this through the global tool. Instead, I'll do Clearview using local adjustments again. So let's do this one as a Actually, I probably can do this just as a straight up graduated filter. Let's see here. Let's try that. Graduated filter, I will have it gradually change over a pretty narrow area. We'll let it hit into the water just a little bit there. I think that'll work. Then we'll take our clear view and drag that up. And there we go. Look at that. Now we've added that nice texture into the trees in here without affecting the water in the foreground. So very, very subtle change, or very simple change, I should say, not subtle at all. But look at that. Now we've added that contrast just into the trees in there, but I've left the water alone. Bit more flat, which is what I want. The problem with making the foreground more contrasty like that is the eye gets drawn to it, right? If we go back over to this, and let me do this, let me toggle that off, go back to the way it started with the clear view on. The image, your eye kind of, or the image is competing for your attention, right? Is your eye supposed to go to this part of the image or to the foreground here? It's just too contrasty here. I want the eye to be drawn to the trees in the background there. So for me, turning off the clear view plus here, going into the selective tool and turning it on there is a better way to go. Now I can combine them, right? I could do a tiny bit of clear view plus globally. Let's do that. Turn it on and just make a little bit of it. I could do that. That might be all right. Or I could do a whole other control line or graduated line over the bottom part and do it that way as well. Either way, you get the result that you want and off you go. All right, cool. Let's wrap this thing up. I see Chris has a question about previewing the mask. Certainly. Local adjustments. There's a button down here that says show masks. If I toggle that, it'll show the mask. Also, when you hover over the main, what do you call it? The main line there, that does it. That shows the mask. And I think, is it Shift M? Yeah, Shift M is the keyboard shortcut that will toggle that mask as well. So there's another way to do it. So you can hit the UI down here, you can hit Shift M, or simply hover over this. Is there a tool over here to do it? No. Okay, so those are your options. There you go. Hopefully that helps. All righty. That, ladies and gentlemen, is it. That wraps me up for today. I hope you enjoyed that today. That was fun. I like these kind of shows where I just got a bunch of images and I'm just trying to make them all a bit better, playing with the approach to it. I hope you enjoyed that too. If you think of any questions that you didn't get to ask today or your question was missed, hit me up on social media, PhotoJoseph on Twitter. That's the best way to do it. Hit me there publicly and I will do my best to answer your question. Otherwise, head over to the website, photojoseph.com/DXO. You can check out all the old webinars. If you missed any part of this one, it'll get posted there in like a few days or a week or so, or once this is up online, I will post it there as well. Of course, it will be on the DXO YouTube channel. So with that said, I think we're gonna wrap it up. Thanks everybody, take care. We'll see you, I think it's like a month or so. I think next month I got another one coming up. I think so. See you then, bye.